The mailman doesn't deliver on a Sunday.
If you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball.
Anthony for three. Bang! J.R. Smith! We just saw men fly. LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Cleveland! This is for you!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast. I am Ronan Gaine. He's Chris Nambu. Thank you for joining us once again. Today we are going to be talking about the NBA draft. Not the most popular class we've ever seen, but there's definitely a lot of interesting prospects, and we're going to be diving into our 5 favorites and also a couple of sleepers that we like to go late in the first round. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you all so much for listening. And thank you so much for making this your first podcast for NBA coverage. Remember, you are on Apple Podcasts. You're on Spotify. Make sure you leave that 5-star review. You're on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. You do that. We'll keep producing that content. Before we get into the draft, some other big news dropped since we've last recorded. The Lakers finally hired JJ Redick. He's in. First-time head coach in LA. A lot of people already questioning it. A lot of people going to turn to the whole crap that LeBron got him this job and this and that and all that sort of absolute nonsense. But he spoke well in his presser yesterday. And one thing I just got to say is, like, I know it's the Lakers and only success is championships, but if they're a playoff team next year, that's an immensely successful first season for JJ Redick.
Yeah, and I don't even know. We don't even know what the immediate future holds for the Lakers right now. A lot is in the air. And I think 3 things on that front in terms of what we care about in a head coach. One, it's clear that it's not experience. We've seen so many new head coaches over the years. I think the number one thing is how they work well with players. He is on the forefront that we've seen of really creating relationships with players and broadening that relationship with the media and players being on their shows, inviting them to his show. And he really has a great chemistry that we get to see behind the scenes with his podcasting and YouTube channel and all that. Like, clearly there's that chemistry. Clearly he has that with LeBron as well. And that's important. Number 1, player chemistry. Number 2 is, how does a head coach interact with the media? How do they portray things and just like settle things down? Like, so many times there's unnecessary drama or things that are not addressed that should be addressed. That's just frustrating for fans. And I mean, JJ, I think he interacts really honestly on live television in talking to other hosts and stuff. Obviously, it's going to be a very different dynamic as a coach. Like, you have to keep things a little bit closer to the chest. There's some things that maybe management don't want you to talk about, things like that. But I think in general, like, he's a well-spoken guy. And then 3, like, basketball knowledge. Like, he is intimately involved with the modern game. Like, he was part of that changing game. He's not a guy that was playing in the 80s and 90s or early 2000s. Like, he's a guy that has a good, deep understanding of what needs to happen. And in terms of player evaluation as well, and what players fit what roles, I haven't heard him say anything that I or many people who know ball like really disagree with. Like, he's not someone who's on the air talking about defensive strategies, offensive, nothing on either side of the ball that really raises any red flags about his own, analysis of the game. So I don't think there's a ton of holes to poke except for his resume. And we've already established that there's a ton of new coaches that get hired. And it's about, I think, for the Lakers, longevity in establishing a culture. And he seems like a guy that would do that. So I don't see why anyone in Lakers Nation should be really too apprehensive about it, other than maybe the resume. But hey, that was going to be a thing for a lot of different coaches as well. And that graphic, bro, was that an ESPN graphic of his resume? Was that an ESPN? Oh my God, bro! he leaves he leaves the office, and the next day they got a graphic of him in his resume. What was it, like a 8th grade volunteer coach? And then that's nasty work, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you like to think that he'll be looked on kindly by the media, but obviously he was he was also known for kind of clowning some of the guys at ESPN in certain situations as
Yeah.
well. So maybe they
Maybe it's
won't
in
be
good fun. I don't know.
maybe they won't be too nice when it comes to
Seriously.
criticizing him.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be that's definitely something that's gonna be
Uh,
interesting to watch. But I like everything. Like he speaks, like you said, he speaks really well. I think he comes across well. I think he's a guy that the way he talks kind of reminds you of like the Joe Mazzulla type of model. Like he likes the math, as Joe Mazzulla likes to bring up a lot. He likes the math side of things and winning that battle. And he talks about that, the analytics and the little things like that. And I think he's the type of guy that's he's gonna be super committed. He's gonna be working 24 hours a day to make sure he can do the best job that he possibly can. And like Rob Pelinka, he came out and said we wanted someone different. We didn't want someone that's just the norm. All right. Hopefully that means you're actually going to give him a fair chance, and
yeah.
you're actually gonna run with him for an extended period of time, and not just judge him off
Yeah.
1 year or one bit of success compared to slightly less success the following year. He's really got to, if they're going to do this, they got to do it right. They got to give him a chance to really build something. Yeah, I get it. It's the Lakers. If they're missing the playoffs 2 years in a row, then yeah, you're gonna have to fire him. But if it's a similar situation that they've had with Darvin Ham, they have to keep going with him.
Well, let's see what they do in terms of team building, in terms of getting the right
That's the big thing.
guys.
That's the big thing.
So how much how much of this is going to be another blame game of yeah, we got another new head coach. Sorry, we'll try again. That would be terrible. I do believe in JJ Redick. I think he's a guy that could be a long-term culture setting guy that you can build around a coach like that. I believe. But I thought you were going to drop news about my Bulls. That was the most exciting news. We all knew that JJ Redick was going to get the coaching job. Do we
That's true.
touch on that real quick?
Well, I mean, all you got to
I'm,
say is,
I'm a little bit more
God damn
emotionally
it,
stable
Chicago! Could you not have got a first round pick? This is OKC. They have every first round pick in the world, and you couldn't get
now. They
one.
have too many picks. They could fill, how many rosters was it? Like 7 rosters with the next like 5 years of picks.
And their Bulls couldn't get one. I mean, yeah, they'll say, "Oh, we just really wanted Josh Giddey," but I mean, come on, get a first round pick. Alex Caruso is a legitimate championship level player. He's not
He's
a
a Derek
star.
White. He's a
Yeah,
Derek
like
White level
he's
player.
like he's a guy that any team going for title will want in their team. So like you should have got. They really they blew that in terms of they really should have got at least one first round pick for him.
Yeah, to distill everything about that trade, I think a few things are true. One is Alex Caruso's trade value is different today than it was before the trade deadline. His contract expires next offseason. You only get one playoff run with him as opposed to 2. And also, the fact that Chicago had been connected to Giddey for a little bit of time and then went out and made the move tells me that they knew. Like, the OKC knew the guy that they wanted, and they had less leverage to make that deal happen. In addition to that, I think also I'm a little bit wary of why they want Giddey so bad. Because on the positive end of it, I'm like, oh, cool. That's like kind of, you get some offense from like you got from Lonzo in terms of the open court and a big guard who can play make and rebound and run the open court. But then that makes you think again, like, do we not have a fresh mindset? Are we consistently just thinking of building on that one half of a magical season? Is that it? Is that the vision here? Is that what we're doing? Is that why we're not investing in the future and looking for picks? Because there were deals out there for 3 picks, 3 picks, pre-trade deadline. Maybe that's dwindled down to a couple or one. I don't know. But it's tough to think about the actual decision making behind this deal. Not just a player. Like I'm excited to see what Giddey can do in Chicago. I think he's still got a lot of untapped potential. But the actual process, the management process of getting in a guy, honing in on him, not having, the best advantage to make this deal, and then also long term not thinking about a fresh way to build this team and just trying to go back to square one, which didn't lead anywhere in the beginning. It's a very net neutral, slightly negative feeling, even though we got a young prospect who, by the way, another caveat to this is we need to extend him this summer. If he's going to outplay his contract probably, and then you're going to have to pay him more next year, you're going to have to pay him now while his value is low. So you're basically committed to Giddey for the next 3-4 years
Yeah.
potentially. So
Yeah,
interesting.
it's an interesting move, and you like to think there's a plan, but like the talk out of the Bulls after the deal was like they've been looking to add more playmaking that they lost with Lonzo. That was kind of the whole thing that they just
Which makes you feel
they
great about Lonzo being reportedly healthy for next season, right? Yeah, I
yeah,
really believe that now.
really coming out of that, and then now you're kind of just like, well, what way are they going to go now? Like, are they going to go into the full rebuild? I mean, there's talk that they're showing out Zach LaVine to anyone and everyone. What's DeRozan want to do? Like, he's a guy in a position where he should want to be on a team that are really looking to contend. He can't be stuck with a team that are in limbo like the way the Bulls are now. So I think it's interesting to see if this is going to be the first domino that goes, or is this a new way they have thinking that they can possibly have some success going into next year and not just moving towards a rebuild. But let's get into the draft stuff.
Do it.
The big story of the week, the draft is going down this Wednesday in Brooklyn and also Thursday. Don't know why they had to do it over 2 days, but that's a decision that the NBA has made. We're gonna
You know
be
why? Money.
yeah, of course.
Money.
That's everything's about money, isn't it? Everything's about money. We're going to be looking into our five favorites from each of us. We're going to be talking their strengths and weaknesses, and also potential best fits for these guys. So let's jump straight into it.
Yeah.
Who's
I
number
think
5? Let's go.
Number 5. And I'll say this before we jump into it, that one thing about this draft, there's no consensus picks. It's really about what teams will like players the most, and this is so much more about opinion. So I feel objectively a little more comfortable just throwing our opinions out there, because it seems like everyone has a different one. If you look at different draft boards everywhere, everything's a little different. And in no particular order, I'll say I like all 5 of these players. I'll just start out with a really big wild card for me. So the 2 questions I have for these players and why they're on this short list of mine is, of these players, what's the biggest question about them? And if they answer it, do they have the highest potential of players that we've looked at? And 2, do these players have a high likelihood of answering those questions? And I'll start at number 5. For me, Alex Sarr, a guy who does have a lot of questions, but let's just look at the positives for this player. He's got a Jaren Jackson Jr. like build, 7 feet tall, over 9 feet standing reach. He's a guy who defensively can defend on the perimeter. He's got the feet to do that. He's got amazing shot blocking, not just potential. You see it right now. And on the defensive end, he's a guy that you could bring in as a rookie. He can switch. He can play the drop. He's got great instincts as an off-ball defender. So for all these reasons, he's automatically an elite talent. And then you look at the offense, and that's where the biggest question comes, is that and rebounding. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. But offensively, he's a guy that is an inconsistent shooter. But when you look at the tape, he does have a smooth release. His mechanics are a little bit weird. He does have a little bit of weird spin to the ball, but he's got a very quick set to his shot, and he's got a quick release. Unlike a guy like who Jaren Jackson Jr. has a very unconventional shot, but look at him. He's still stretching the floor. If he's a guy who can answer that shooting from the perimeter, I have no doubt that his in-between game and his low-post game, something that a lot of young bigs struggle with early on, which I think is pretty natural. You see guys like Porzingis, for example, who took a long time to get into that. If he can answer just the shooting within the first few years, he immediately becomes one of the most interesting bigs in the league, like a Miles Turner level shot blocker with the same type of shooting, with the range to be a rim runner as well. Like that to me is easily a top 5 elite level pick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like he's definitely a good athlete. He's probably not a great athlete, but he's a very good athlete. He's definitely got versatility, and there's obviously that room. There's that room for him to grow. I think there's a lot of room for him to grow. This is definitely a future pick. I don't think he's a guy you're going to instantly bring in and expect him to be like the best guy on your team. I think he'll probably have struggles as a rookie, but like the shot, it's like the 3-point is a real struggle. Like he's showing some strength to like his pull-up 2s and his float game. Like there's potential there, and he's got to get stronger finishing at the rim. That's definitely an area that he's going to need to improve on. But like you mentioned, the defense, that's definitely true. Obviously, there's certain schemes where I was looking at some tape and there's certain areas where he sometimes can get a bit lost. But in terms of being a switchable defender and being a one-on-one defender, he can be great right from the off there. I think he's the perfect fit for the Atlanta Hawks as
Mm,
long as they are keeping Trae Young. I think he
yeah,
could really thrive with an elite pick and roll guard. So I think it would make a lot more sense for him to go to Atlanta than it would to go to Washington. And I think the rumor is that he preferred to go to Washington. And even I think a lot of people don't have
yeah.
the Hawks
Interesting.
picking him at number one either. But
Yeah.
I like I'm watching him and seeing what he could be. As long as the Hawks are committed to Trae Young, as long as they're not thinking rebuild, I think Alex Sarr is the perfect pick for them.
Yeah. I have a little bit of PTSD with picking French players and also players from the NBL. So this
Mhm.
combination kind of scares me. But yeah, I mean, I think the only big question mark I have, I am pretty confident about his, like I said, the defense. Pretty confident about the offense coming around. But the rebounding, I think, is one thing that is very scary. He posted a 13% rebound rate,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, that's guard level. That's pitiful for his size too.
Mhm.
So that is something to definitely keep an eye on if his physicality just doesn't translate to the NBA. And I think that's a knock we'll see in a lot of these players. There's a big question mark on him. And I think the Atlanta, that combination with Trae Young, I think Trae Young can definitely work with anybody. And Washington would be Washington's such a clean slate. Like they're a team that's going to clean up house, and they've got things to figure out, and that's somewhere he could, on a low pressure situation, figure out.
Mm.
Atlanta is such an interesting team that we'll probably get into a little bit more, but that is not the most stable environment right now for a rookie to find his way in the NBA, especially a lot of these players, the question marks.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fair point. It would definitely be tough, but I'm kind of like hoping hoping that Atlanta have a bit more of a plan than they kind of appear to at this
Yeah.
stage. They still isn't confirmed that they're going to make the pick at number one yet. That's it, this close to it. There's still those rumors swirling.
Yeah.
My number five, I've got Dalton Connect, man out of
Interesting.
Tennessee, being projected as a mid to late lottery pick. This guy is an elite floor spacer. He is going to hit triples right from the off. High quality off ball player. He's got the ability to self create. Obviously, there's room to grow there. I don't think we'll see too much of it, especially right off the bat as a rookie. But there's definitely room to grow there. There's definitely potential for him to get better at it. He this like when I look at these kind of weaker drafts, I always like to go to
Mm,
shooting and like two-way ability,
fair.
shooting and defense. That's kind of an area I always like to go to because that's the type of player that teams are always going to need and they're always worth taking a shot on. There's the weaknesses we see. He's not overly comfortable playing against length and size. He defense is his big weak spot. The question with him is, can his defense get to a level where it doesn't play him off the court? That's kind of the big question mark you have with him because he's usually gets targeted there. He's usually the weak point of the defense. But in terms of the shot making ability, the ability to space the floor for teams, I think he's got that kind of that Buddy Hield archetype. I think that's kind of an area that a guy that people will be looking at and looking at Dalton Connect and see, can he get to that level? And that's an all-time 3-point shooter right there.
Yeah, he's one of the best 3-point shooters in this draft. I'm a little higher another one. But I guess my thing with him in a draft like this, it does get interesting when there's not clear-cut talent and maybe you just take guys who are productive. He's 24.
Yeah.
He's
Mhm.
24, and I guess for whatever reason, I'm a little lower on older players who can't be a two-way impact. That kind of scares me.
That's fair.
Um, who do you think would be willing to take that risk? Because a lot of mock drafts have him in the top 10 because of everything you said. It's all legit, and I believe that. But what team would be willing to take on a 24-year-old with defensive question marks with that sort of offensive upside?
I mean, I was looking at it, and obviously Utah is where he's getting projected to go in a lot of places. They're they're a team that they could definitely use his spacing. That's for
Yeah,
sure. But
yeah,
they're also quite a young team, and maybe they wouldn't be willing to draft that old. I'd look at the Spurs are obviously a team that what they need is shooting. like shooting would be a great thing for them to bring in, but maybe it's reaching too high at number 8. Maybe that's
very funny you said Buddy Hield then, because Buddy Hield, the older player that you draft um, alongside your young star, that you bring in alongside a young star, that didn't work out too well, did it?
and maybe even Chicago. Chicago aren't going full rebuild. If they're gonna try and continue on with some sort of resemblance of an experienced team, like he could arguably fit the mold in there.
See, that would be he would be a player that would infuriate so many fan bases. So many the visceral reaction you just gave me of thinking about it, because I don't think he's a bad player. Like, I think he's a great player, but the idea of drafting a 24-year-old is sickening to me as a guy who we need to like get future talent. Like, he seems like a somewhat finished product to me. I don't know, maybe like a team like Memphis. Memphis needs to make a run this year, having a guy who they can make up for on the defensive end, with a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. Maybe a team like Charlotte get some more spacing, more shooters around LaMelo. Detroit, they need legit shooting badly. Maybe like that. I think teams with more question marks that need to make more of a risk. It's almost teams like Chicago have no reason to be picking a guy. If that was something that happened, that would be awful. Like teams like Atlanta, teams like Chicago, teams like OKC, like they need, or not OKC, Houston.
It might be awful by Chicago, but it'd be something that you wouldn't be surprised by either.
I know, yeah. But overall, I think I like it, and I think he would make a good impact on teams like that. I'll give the flip side. Again, mine are in no order. I like these guys equally. I think they could go different places. Again, eye of the beholder draft. Stephon Castle.
Yes.
Stephon Castle. I'm really interested in him. So he is obviously making news because he's saying, I'm actually a point guard, didn't get to be a point guard. Questions on if that is something he can project to be. See his secondary playmaking, but the reason that everybody knows him is his contributions on the defensive end. That elite on-ball defense, that 6'6", long wingspan frame, over 200 pounds. He's going to be a guy that can play defense 1 through 3. He's a guy who can play off-ball, on-ball. He's a great cutter. And the secondary playmaking that we did at least get to see was good. He has really, really good IQ. And that just level. I think my favorite thing about him and a couple other players in this draft, but him in particular, he just has such a motor. He has such a ferocity to his game. And that level of effort that you constantly see from him, especially, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a champion at that level of competitiveness, that matters, especially in a draft like this, where for me, that tells me he's going to answer some of these questions just with his level of play on the court and how competitive he is and how willing he is to take it to the next level. But the question for him is the shooting. Yeah. Is that going to come? And that is something that is really
takes to the next level. That's what that is, though. I think that if the shooting comes alongside what the defense and like his ability to kind of finish at the rim, he's a pretty strong finisher. Like if that shooting come, that kind of takes him from being the really great role player on a winning team to potentially being a second or third star on a winning team.
Absolutely. And he doesn't have a broken shot. It's not a broken shot. It's one that has been proven. We haven't seen it be efficient. And I think you'd be willing to take a risk on a guy developing a shot because you see the positives in terms of what he can do with the ball in his hands. He can run a bit of pick and roll. He can attack closeouts. He can be a great off-ball scorer. And the shooting is going to limit him in the first couple of years when teams really just don't respect that. But if that's a developmental project you're willing to work with, I think he's a guy with extremely high upside, given his size, his strength, and what he's shown defensively.
Yeah, absolutely. And like obviously, it's a tough one with him because obviously we've seen him be like a great secondary playmaker. Definitely not a lead playmaker, especially as a rookie from what we've seen. But he's also reportedly not working out for any teams that already have a point guard. So I mean, would teams that have a point guard be willing to take the risk and bring in a guy who's going to just be instantly unhappy to be there? Like
No, not in
that's
a draft like this.
yeah,
No.
like that's something that you probably don't want to do. But then you're kind of like, where's the fit for him? Because pretty much all the teams picking in the top 10 all already have a point guard. I
Yeah,
mean, there's no real like
questionable.
unless you're talking about San Antonio, but I also don't think he's the type of point guard that they're really looking for right now. He could become that, but I think it's San Antonio are kind of the only team I really look at that don't have that obvious point guard that would take up the main responsibility of playmaking duties. But I mean, I look at him and I quietly think he'd be a great fit. He'd be a great fit alongside Scoot Henderson if the Blazers didn't have every point guard in the world already.
I was gonna say that would be his least favorite
Yeah,
situation.
they literally have like
Yeah.
17 guards, but obviously that like I think him and Scoot, if the Blazers were willing to kind of make a big splash, I think he'd be, and Scoot is their guy. I think he would actually be a great fit alongside him. But outside of that, obviously we know the Hornets. They've already got LaMelo Ball. Pistons have already got Cade Cunningham. The Hawks have Trae Young and DeJounte Murray at the moment. We don't think they'll have both of them by the end, but still. And then like Wizards, I don't think the Wizards would take him at 2. So it's going to be interesting to see where he falls, and interesting to see if teams that already have a point guard still take the shot on him, especially in if he ends up going somewhere in like the 6 to 8 range.
Yeah, I think he would definitely make sense in San Antonio, to be perfectly honest. And the shooting though is tough because you want guys who can space the floor for Wemby. So maybe that's the obvious answer why not.
Mhm.
But adding a guy who, this comes down to workouts, right? This is going to come down to workouts and what does Pops feel on him? What does each individual teams feel on him? I think maybe Washington makes more sense because there's less of a specific need. Like he's a blank slate that they can work with, and that's why I think Washington could really take on anybody.
Yeah.
But I think he seems like like I said, he's a championship level like talent in terms of how he competes, what he can do defensively. In San Antonio, their need isn't just shooting and playmaking from the one. Their need is very much so defense. Very much so defense. And that's an identity that I think that they want to get to, but you can't get to it unless you have the personnel to do it. And he's absolutely a guy that can. So those are the only 2 teams he's actually worked out for. And I think if I had to choose, if I were him, I'm absolutely picking San Antonio, even if that means you're not going to be a quote unquote traditional point guard, and you just have to prove your shooting over the years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Who you got next on your list? Because obviously I had Stephen Castle at 4, and then I had Alex Sarr at my 3. So we've already discussed some of my guys. Who you got? Who's
Okay,
next
so
up
we
on your
got some
list?
overlap here.
Yeah.
I guess we overlapped more than I thought we would. I got an interesting one. He's climbed up some boards. And he, again, I'm going against my better judgment of going for French players. But Tidjane Salahoun, a small forward out of France. This guy, his physical profile he's another guy that you just look at where he is physically, and that's a video game level wing. He's 6'9", 217. He's got a big frame. He's not wiry, lanky. He's got a 7'1.5" wingspan. He's only 18 years old, plays above the rim, elite slasher, and some streaky shooting. So questionable whether or not the good shooting-ish that we've seen over the last year is something that he's had over the past few years, which have been very bad.
Mm-hmm.
The playmaking, maybe not there. But in terms of just a raw talent, and that's what I think you like about a draft like this, where there's not clear-cut stars, there's not clear-cut obvious answers. Who are the guys that, if they can answer those questions, like I said, are going to have the highest ceiling? I think that, this is it. And he gives me kind of shades of, and I'm saying this as a good thing. When we first saw some early highlights of like Kevin Knox at his size and his athleticism, we're like, whoa, how did we miss on that? If that kept continuing, that's what I first felt like I was watching that again. but he seems like he has really good feel for the game, and defensively, his effort there, that's something that you love to see. So maybe an interesting pick. It seems like a lot of draft boards either have him like in the late teens or in like the top 7, and there's no in between.
Yeah, it's kind of he's a little bit all over the place. What team do you think would be a good fit for him? So like, or even what do you think we'll see him offer as a rookie rather than just like the whole kind of growth aspect of him?
I mean, as a rookie, he's going to be bad. He's the type of player who's going to be bad as a rookie. Might take him a full season to get fully used to it, especially getting used to the physicality of the NBA. Like a physical player in Europe is going to translate a little bit differently to the physicality of the NBA. But I think teams who have time, Washington, they have time. Maybe they just want to create Team France right now. I mean, you got Bilal. Now you can get Tidjane. I think a team like Memphis as well, like he would fit in really well. I mean, he has that same sort of mentality, that physical play, that downhill play. And he's someone who in Memphis would have a lot of support around him, enough depth to kind of protect him, and he could still get some minutes alongside Morant. But I think probably Washington makes the most sense for him, as he's like very much a developmental project. So someone who is outside of the top 20 in recent months, jumping up to the top 10, I think that would be.
What's Washington's second pick? When do they pick second in the draft?
Washington picked second.
Yeah, no. When's their other pick? Because they're not going to take this guy at 2.
They're 20. He won't be there at 26. I think he could be a surprise. Like I'll say this as we haven't officially determined this. Who our guy who would jump up in the draft, but I think he could surprise a lot of people by jumping up to the draft.
Okay. I don't know who we know. Like the Blazers are a team that have 2 lottery picks there at 7 and 14.
Mm-hmm.
Would he be a fit in there possibly?
I think they're there as well. Mm-hmm. We could see him in Portland. I think they're another blank slate. I would not be shocked though that the more I watch this guy, that he could be a guy who jumps. If teams end up deciding that they want to take swings for the fences in a draft where you have a lot of question marks, that's a pretty big swing right there with his frame.
Yeah, that would definitely be a swing with that. That's what you kind of hope for. You were like, I think the thing people are looking at this draft are kind of that outside guy that rises up like 10 picks more than most people had him projected, or what trades end up going down. I think that's kind of always a bad sign for a draft when that's kind of the way everyone's kind of looking at it. Next up on my list, I got a pretty obvious one, a pretty notable one. Donovan Clingan.
Yeah. Yep.
He's being projected to go anywhere in the top 10. Some have him going at number 1. Some have him going at number 10. He's been projected pretty much everywhere. 7'2", 7'7" wingspan. This guy could be a really
280.
A big dude.
Pounds,
big dude. He can be an elite rim protector. He can be strong offensively as well. He's got ability to play in the post. He's got the ability to play just as a dunker and as a lob threat. I think he's got really good instincts on the offensive end. He moves quite well. He readjusts to get in position for guards to find him and to get in position to be able to have easy dunks and little things like that. Strong footwork. He's going to swallow up rebounds on the defensive end. Like, look at the size of him, and he's going to be a guy that's going to want to play in the drop. He's going to be one of the guys who wants to remain around the rim. And then also, he's for his size, he's got a pretty smooth game. I mean, he's got a nice touch. He's got great hands, which is always a plus for a big guy. You can be confident throwing any sort of pass into him and believe he's going to come out with it. He makes good passes out of the post. There's still a lot of growth there for him, but I think the development we saw last year puts him in a position where he could really thrive in this league, especially if he can get to a team that already has like a versatile floor spacing big. I think if he can find that situation, that would be perfect for him. He might get targeted and exposed. People will try to get him out of the paint and then try and blow past him. That's definitely an area he needs to improve. But I think I would love to see him in either Memphis or San Antonio. I think if Memphis could trade up to get him, he could genuinely be their next Marc Gasol. He could be the answer they were looking for at the center position that they've been looking for. They had it with Steve Adams, and then obviously he got hurt, and now he's gone. They don't want to pay Jaren Jackson Jr. at the at the 5. I think if they can find a trade to move up, I don't know how high they'd have to move up to get him. That's definitely something that they're going to have to kind of wait and see on. But either Memphis, he's there in Memphis, or he's there in San Antonio, and they have just the two towers of him and Wembanyama. I think that'd be great
I was
fits for
thinking
him.
about that too. Like as like a 2K idea, how interesting is that? And in a real life idea, you saw what Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert were able to accomplish together. Very different situations in that Wemby is not yet the shooter that Cat is. If you're thinking that, you got to think about the development of Wemby's shot first. But that would be insane, right? That would be crazy to see those two on the floor together. It would be impossible to score at the rim, but how stretched out would they get? I love the Memphis idea because Steven Adams was such an underrated part of what Memphis's success was. The screens that he set, the box outs that he had for the Grizzlies to get out and run, and the way that he just like could protect the middle of the floor. Like defensively, he was such a black hole in the middle of the floor, and that allowed them to do a lot of the good things that they did, which was attacking the passing lanes and getting out and running. And that's how they have one of the best paces in the NBA. And that's the exciting Grizzlies team that we love. And part of that was Steven Adams. So can you recreate that with Klingon, a guy that you could do this long term with? And he's the reason he's exciting for me. And I had him borderline here. For me, like top 5, like if I'm picking 5, like I want the most impact positions. And for me, that's on the wing and that kind of combo guard build for me. But what's really exciting for him is he's not only a surefire contributor at the NBA level, 100%. There's no question about that. He doesn't have a ton of questions besides what you know, which is his lack of shooting and his lack of free throw shooting. So if you're getting like a light version of Rudy Gobert from him as a rookie, fine. That's a really productive NBA player. And you hit on that, and that's a guy who can be part of your team for a decade. And for a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who have your perimeter players, who have a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. who can really support him and stretch the floor out, like that's a team that makes the most sense. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That was probably one of my favorite fits looking at this draft and where someone might land. If Klingon lands in Memphis, that's a home run. I don't know about some of the other top 5 teams, if they're willing to take a swing on a guy who does have a pretty modest floor, honestly. Like thinking about Rudy Gobert, like he is at the very top of what a large, somewhat plotting center can do in the NBA and can be exposed in the playoffs and needs kind of specific situations to work well. So that's kind of you're hoping that's the best you get out of him in a way. The passing though maybe is what are you expecting his passing will get better, because that's kind of the X factor with him, I think.
I think that's the area that we've seen the most potential for growth, and obviously that area that just kind of makes you look twice at him and think, ooh, if that really comes to fruition, that's a real game changer there. The big worry I kind of have for him is he going to be like another Mitchell Robinson, and not just because of the free throw shooting, more because of the injuries, because when you're as big as he is, injuries are always going to be a worry.
So we've seen one piece of news on that is that it's apparently a tendon issue. It's not a bone injury, and it's not affected his draft stock too much. It's not mentioned too much when teams are discussing him. I guess I'll look at it from this perspective then. Like, what teams, I guess, make the most sense for him outside of Memphis? Like, what team would look at his passing and be like, that's something we want to build around? And I guess to add on another layer to that is, can his post game improve in a way that he could take advantage of passing from the mid post? Because right now, not a lot of teams are going to invest in that in the same way that, your Alperen Şengün's of the world have a post game good enough to demand double teams, to demand a lot more attention.
Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of an interesting one. The people that kind of want to have him grow that way, like it's tough because obviously the traditional big these days, obviously it's a lot more of a role player, not like back like 20 years ago. Klingon probably would have been the consensus number 1 pick in this draft with being the big man. So now it's kind of interesting to see what teams are willing to do, because a lot of the top teams already have centers. I think Detroit have already got Jalen Duren. Portland have already got DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah.
Like there's
Charlotte's
a lot of
got
teams that already have centers.
Yeah.
Like, would Washington take a swing at him? I'm not so sure.
That's the thing. That's why I don't have him in my. I think
Yeah.
there's enough top 5 perimeter talent to swing on that I think those top 5 teams do, unless of course, I mean Atlanta's got Clint Capella. Like they're not vying for that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it goes to Atlanta. I don't think he goes to Washington. I definitely don't think he goes to Houston. And yeah, San Antonio, that's interesting. Detroit, no. Charlotte, Mark Williams, Ayton. San Antonio picks again at 8. I mean, they have 2 swings here.
Yeah.
So maybe that to get a guard at 4, and if he's hanging out there at 8, and you think Wemby's, I mean, I believe Wemby's going to be able to stretch the floor more. Albeit the one problem that I think you have, and this is big macro conversation just about San Antonio's direction in the future. I think the game you want to see them play is stretching the floor and Wemby going to work. You don't want someone who's going to clog anything up for him. But that 2 towers mold, that could be very interesting if they go that route there. But if he falls to Memphis, great. But if Memphis again is still looking for more wing depth, if they're looking for more shooting, say they go with we'll transition here. I'll say my next guy. He goes with a Reed Shepherd type of player to stretch the floor. Then he starts to fall. Utah, they got their center. Chicago, do we have Vooch for the next 3 years? We don't need him, right? Then you look at OKC. If he falls to OKC, how fantastic would that be? I'm a big proponent of OKC really beefing up their size. I love the J-Dub, Jalen Williams, number 2. I love what he did in the playoffs. Like, he had some great minutes stretching the floor, but I think he's more situational. But both of those guys are situational. If OKC can really determine what they need depending on the series, because for them it's playoff conversation. Who's a guy that's going to help us in the playoffs? Klingon, a guy who just won the national championship, a guy who's going to fill that exact kind of big need that you have, alongside Chet Holmgren. That would be also an awesome slide. So for guys who are jumping up, guys sliding, if Klingon slides, that would be a amazing fit right there.
Yeah, I think the idea of him sliding, I think teams will be willing to trade up for him. Obviously not going crazy with it, but I think if it's somewhere around the 7 or 8 pick, I think it wouldn't surprise me to see a team like possibly OKC or
Trading
like
up.
Memphis to trade up and make sure they go and get him. I think that's definitely a possibility. Obviously, you want to go as high as you can in the draft, but maybe for Klingon, it might be not the worst thing in the world for him to slide a little bit.
Yeah. So you had Necht in your top 5. I had Reed Shepherd. You picked the other. You had the other shooter. I had.
Hey man, Reed Shepherd was my number 1, baby.
He's your number 1.
I believe in this guy.
And you're not like all 5 are equal. You kind of are like, I like this guy the most. Reed Shepherd's your favorite. Okay. So you talk me through it. Number 1. All right.
Elite shooter. His shot is beautiful. I really like watching his shot. It is just a beautiful shot. High, quick release. Shot 52% last season. He's got the ability to play in the pick and roll, dribble handoffs. To see that, I'm looking forward to seeing that more when he gets into the NBA. Maybe not the ultimate traditional point guard, but I think the upside that he has here, like the range from like the level of player he could be as a rookie to what he could potentially get to, I think is so high. I love the way his game just flows. I love the kind of tenacity, and he's that type of player. He's got that dog in him. He wants all that smoke. He can miss 10 shots, but he'll still step up and drain a step back triple on the very next play. Like that's the type of mentality that he has. And mentality plays such a big part, and I think in what players can achieve, and especially as rookies coming into the NBA when it's going to be tough. When there's going to be those moments where you think, my God, why am I even at this level? Maybe I should have just stayed in college. There's going to be those sort of moments. And I just don't think that's going to bother him at all. Yeah, his handle's not completely there yet. Yeah, he needs to make improvement with his passing. He's not going to be the star lead point guard straight off the bat, but I think the potential is definitely there. Like, I think he could range anywhere from like a Grayson Allen to a Derek White, to even like a Steve Nash, but probably a better scorer than a passer.
Whoa, Ronan. Well, hold on. Well, everyone relax. I know you didn't mean that like
Like,
Steve Nash.
like I'm not saying that he's going to be a multi-time MVP. Like I'm not putting it out like that. But like he could definitely be a guy that becomes like a 20 point per game scorer. Like he's got that. He's definitely got that range to him. He plays a lot bigger than his size on defense, but of course he is a small guy. So certain situations he is going to get targeted. There's no way around that. But when you play as hard as he does, it's like the least that you can do, and it makes it so that you're not going to believe he's going to get played off the court or anything like that.
Yeah, and he's somewhat on the level of Klingon, where I'm thinking of a guy who you know what his floor is good, modestly good, and his ceiling I don't think is super high, but that modestly high floor, he's a guy who's going to contribute to high level winning. And in terms of eyes of the beholder, if you're a Peyton Pritchard guy, if you like what Peyton Pritchard has developed into for the Celtics, who's been tremendously good. If you've not caught up, you've not been watching the Celtics. And he's not a guy Pritchard is not a guy who gets played off the floor as much anymore because of his defense and his size. Celtics have done a great job of covering him up in that area, and he's done a great job of fighting well. You have a bigger frame on Shepherd and a more athletic frame. Like he's gonna play. He can play above the rim sometimes. Like you've seen him get some dunks here. You've seen him also playing the open court. He's really, really tenacious defensively, and that's why I think his 6'2" frame matters a little bit less. He's not that traditional shooter that is just looking for a shot and you don't get a whole lot else. I think he's going to compete on that level, and while he will get targeted, I think he's going to prove on some possessions that he's that guy. And I think for that reason, he could be a starter. Maybe not a day one starter, but he's not a come off the bench, give me some shots kind of guy. I think he's a guy you can hand the ball to. He's not going to play make on every possession, but he can run some sets. And the most important part as a shooter for him is he's not just hanging out in the corner and taking 6 threes a game. Coming off screens, movement, left or right. Put the ball in his hands, put on the floor, one dribble, sidestep off the pick and roll. And he's shooting deep threes too. And that level of versatility to his shooting and that quick release and his elevation, I want to say he was the second or the first in standing vertical in this draft at 6'2". That's some impressive stuff. He's somebody that I'm very excited if San Antonio can pick up. That's the exact kind of solid playmaking guard who's going to absolutely stretch the floor for Wemby. I don't think there's another team in this draft that's better suited for him and better suited for Wemby in terms of that guard position that gets enough playmaking for Wemby, but the second most important part fills that offensive, that floor spacing role for him, and defensively is not going to be, I don't believe he's going to be a huge negative. Maybe at his best, he's a modest negative, but what he's going to bring on the offensive side of the floor is going to be massive, massive for a team like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd like to see him fall there. I think obviously I looked at Houston potentially too, but I also think Houston needs to just, I think they need to trade their pick, and there's more that they're going to do there. Charlotte also is a potential area for him. They absolutely need some knockdown shooting, but obviously San Antonio would definitely be a perfect fit. And I think going into a place like San Antonio, the way Greg Popovich runs the show there, the fact that they've already kind of got that elite star guy in Wemby, I think San Antonio is definitely, I'd like to see him if he falls to 4. I think pretty much all big boards, all mocks have him going at 3. But I think San Antonio would definitely be the dream fit for him.
Yeah. Who else you got? Who do we not cover?
I have my sleeper now. Have you got anyone else?
One guy that also, it's similar to Salone, is Ron Holland, a guy who's got really, really great size, 6'8", 200 pounds, over 7 foot wingspan. Question mark for him, kind of typical for these archetypes, is the shooting. Played for G League Ignite, and great kind of level of bar of measurement for him. Jalen Green is, what do we see from Jalen Green on the Ignite? A little bit better shooting, but in terms of actual production, like pretty similar. Less efficient shooter, but Ron Holland in terms of a scorer showed it with way more usage. I think it was around 28% usage for a 18-year-old playing against adults. That's tough. You're gonna see the issues with efficiency for a guy like him. So I kind of already answered, like, maybe excuse making rather than answering questions, but he definitely had a reason for some of the deficiencies we saw from him. But in terms of an NBA body, in terms of NBA defense, like, he's absolutely got that. Ron Holland, at his size, could defend 1 through 4.
Yeah.
At his size, could really bully guards. And if that playmaking, if that ball handling continues to improve, I mean, I definitely think that he's someone who's gonna be able to get downhill in the NBA. In terms of fit, like, he, just like Saloon, he could go to any of these teams if teams work him out and really like what he brings to the table, because I think he's a tantalizing potential on the wing spot. Washington, Atlanta, I think Houston's got enough. Detroit could argue about adding another really productive wing alongside the rotation. Charlotte too. I think anybody would be really happy to have a guy like Holland.
Yeah, definitely. I think he could definitely be one of the more underrated guys, but obviously he's been projected. I think I've seen him go anywhere in like kind of the 6 to 9 ranges where he's
Yeah, I
kind
even
of
saw something like 15, 16. Like,
like,
this draft is crazy how there's so much range to where these guys
yeah,
can go.
there's an insane range to some of these guys, but obviously, like you said, the body type, the room for growth there, he's definitely I would think of him as being one of the safer picks potentially in this draft from what his floor could be to what his ceiling
Yeah,
might be.
yeah. That's a guy, if you said Chicago picked up, very happy. I'd be very happy with that. If you're starting to get him outside the top 10, that's an absolute home run for me.
Those are at 9, right?
We are at 11.
11. Okay. Hey, he could fall there. It's you don't know what might end up happening. Maybe if you had another draft pick from OKC, you could work
Yeah.
around maybe trading up
Yeah.
or whatever.
Being the third youngest player in this draft matters too. Thinking about how much room they have to grow, not just physically, but talent-wise, how much we haven't seen from them yet. I think he's a guy that's gone vastly underrated, given some of the expected issues that we saw from him in the G League. Which is an issue. A lot of these young players, they go into the G League, and that's a different route that players take. You get paid early. You get a little bit more of a NBA level challenge, but that NBA level challenge comes with the risk of, facing that level of defense and having that responsibility on your shoulders. And again, 28% usage, that's a really high number for a guy like him.
Yeah, for sure. Want to go sleeper pick or flop pick?
How about we mentioned this before we got on air. I think that, going on the theme of eye of the beholder, players that teams and different evaluators will like different from others. Was there any players that you saw that you consistently saw pretty well evaluated, you just didn't get it, or you were just straight up like, no, I don't like this player?
Yeah, my guy was the projected #1 pick in a lot of big boards. Zach Reisha.
Yeah, I don't see it, man.
Yeah.
I don't see
And
it.
especially in weak draft classes, it's so often the #1 pick that ends up being like the worst guy in the class. I know that's just a generalism, but it so often is that way. But I just don't like. I think he could come in and be a solid defender, but are you really going #1 just for a solid defender?
Yeah.
His shot is improving. His ability to consistently score is improving. I just think there's not enough major upside for me. I don't see it with him. I just don't know that the shot and the scoring ability is gonna translate to the NBA. I can't see it.
Yeah, and let's talk about the major thing for me. 6'9", okay. Neutral wingspan, like, he's a 6'9". Like, when you look at Kobe White, how tall do you think he is? Maybe you already know how tall he is. He's been around long enough.
He's 6'6", right? Or is he that tall?
He doesn't look 6'6", right? Why? Because he has a
Yeah.
small wingspan. And just maybe
That's
random
true.
example out there, but a guy that when you saw his height, you're like, oh, and then you see his wingspan, then you see it on the court, and he plays a lot smaller. And he's kind of like that. Zach plays very small, in my opinion, for his size. He doesn't finish above the rim. He relies mostly on downhill speed and quickness, which, again, I think we've learned over the years that just because making highlight reels, finishing over guys and dunking and everything, that's very far from a predictor of NBA success. But for a wing at his size, you'd want him to be a little bit more physical. You'd want him to have a little bit more bounciness to his game from what you'd expect him to do, which is be a bit of like a slashing playmaker. I think he'll get bullied a little bit. And this is my fear too. Like when we see guys coming out of France, which is why I gave Saloon a pass, because his physicality like really pops when it's a complete opposite for a guy like for a Redick. I mean, he plays more like a 6'5" player than a 6'9" player, the way he finishes around the rim. I will say that the shooting, at his size, the shooting is impressive. I like his release. I think it's quick. I think that'll translate. I don't love the way it looks off the dribble. It doesn't seem like he really has that. He's more so the guy that you're putting in the corner. It's gonna be tough to recover to him because he's so tall and he can get that shot off. But if I'm picking in the top 10 for a guy that might be a 6'9" shooter and solid defender potentially, like there's plenty of those in the NBA. Like that's not what I'm shooting for. I'd wanted to see a little bit more when I looked at the tape on him.
Yeah, I was definitely disappointed in what I saw, but hey, that doesn't mean anything, and he could surprise us all. Did you have a different pick for that?
That was mine, and it's funny. I was wondering what yours was because that was the guy that I was trying to focus in on because a lot of boards had him top 5. Few of them, 7, 8, but he's been consistently in the top 10 on a lot of boards. And the lack of inside scoring, I can't see it. I can't see it. Sure. And 1.4 assists per 36 minutes. A guy that you really want versatile wings, and especially if a guy is going to be able to get downhill, if his quickness translates, can he put the ball on the floor and make a play? Hasn't shown it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also like when you're a rookie and it's not the shot's not always falling, could you turn to your playmaking, and with him it doesn't really appear. So who's your sleeper pick then?
Sleeper pick,
Kel'el Ware.
Kel'el Ware. First of all, his name is literally he's basically Superman name. I love that. That is such, he's got, if we're gonna draft based on name alone, Kel'el, that's gotta be the coolest name to draft. Coming out of Indiana, massive frame, 7'1", looks 7'1". Athleticism, like he prefers to finish off 2 feet. He's not a guy who's like sprinting and dunking over everyone. He's very much more so on finesse and skill, getting some open dunks here and there. But I think the flashes that I've seen from him, and he's being mocked mostly out of the lottery, 15, 17, 20-ish. But I think what's exciting about him is that you get a guy at 7'1" who's got probably the best shot. He's got the best looking three-pointer as a center in the draft. And how many times did we see for the best teams in the league that they had a guy who could really space the floor? And that this is just obvious stuff here that we've seen in the NBA, that you are going to limit the other guys on your roster if you can't space the floor out with your 5. And the biggest question mark for him that's limiting him is his effort. Effort. Can a guy at 7'1" just you can't just stop playing. You can't just stop rebounding, defending. That's got to be your MO, is effort and size and strength. And the strength part is also another question mark for him. So a lot of reasons why teams are maybe sleeping on him is because they haven't seen him be a really active and competitive player compared to his potential. But I think that's what makes him such an interesting prospect, because you get him on a team that can develop him. I think he could be a top 5 player in this draft.
Sure. So you wouldn't want to see the Lakers take him. I think the Ringer is where I go to for my mocks, and they had the Lakers taking him.
Yeah, no, I see a team potentially like Miami picking him up. If you get anybody into a Miami culture, yes, maybe they crash and burn. You never see them again because they did not fit the mold that they want. But a team that could really make him into what he's supposed to be, that would be really, really, really fascinating.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, he's definitely an interesting one, and to see what way it can translate, because a big that can stretch the floor is such a is such a plus. It's something that pretty much all teams want to have. Like, look at the Celtics model, the Pacers model, like obviously the Nuggets too. I guess you can't Jokic to that, but he's just a different animal altogether. But even like the Spurs now bringing in having Wemby, like that's the way that's like the archetype of championship teams these days. You want everyone to be able to space the floor, and if this is a guy that can translate at the next level, he could definitely prove a steal, especially if he falls out of the lottery. My guy, Jared McCain out of Duke, being projected anywhere from late lottery to early 20s. Elite shooter. Maybe he could get to that level where he could be a 1 or 2 time All-Star. Scorer. He's got that dog in him, just like I said about Reed Shepherd. He's got that willingness to take the smoke, that willingness to be the guy. I think he'd be a great fit with a dominant point guard. Maybe he'd only be a 6 man, but I think he's not the most athletic, especially at his size, which I think that's definitely an area that's limiting him. But the high level playmaking, that's also not there. But it's like that sort of way that don't be surprised if he makes some kind of good passing plays and things like that, but also don't be wanting to rely on it either. I think an area where I've seen people that are comparing him to Emmanuel Quickly, and I think that's actually a really great comparison for him. He, especially coming into the league in the early years, he's going to be that spark plug of a scorer. He can do some playmaking, but definitely just providing that punch to a lineup when they need it. I think that's what's going to be, especially in the early years. That's going to be where he makes his mark. He's gonna have to be learning from the likes of like a Jalen Brunson and those type of guys. He's gonna be a guy who's gonna have to be creative in the paint to be able to score in the paint. The 3-point shot is where he's gonna thrive, but teams are gonna know that and they're gonna chase him off that line. They're gonna force him inside. That's gonna be and see what he can do from there. So the weaknesses are definitely there. I see why he's falling away, but
yeah,
I think the scoring and shooting potential is very, very real, and that's why I think there's that potential for him to go from being a 6-man bench guy to a guy who could be fighting to be on a couple of All-Star teams throughout his career.
I do like him. I think that my only knock on him that maybe question whether or not he's like a sleeper, because when you're in the 20s, maybe you are drafting a guy that, all right, can you be the eighth guy off the bench? Can he hit shots and defend? And the answer to that is yes. You get a good 3-and-D player out of him. The finishing. That's just my question, man. Can he play bigger than his size? The answer to that is no. Kind of the answer that we saw from Shepherd. The reason why I was so high on him as a smaller player, where he can shoot the ball but also play physically and athletically above his size. Didn't see that there, and for that reason, I think he'll be a solid like 7th, 8th guy on a rotation, but not a bad pick. I mean, I think he could be somebody that definitely surprises a lot of teams. Comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, he's got that nature around him. I think where he'll draw attention. He'll be a guy we're going to see on some highlight reels and little things like that. I think that's kind of the type that he is. Maybe he's not that. Never going to be a lead guy probably on a team, but I think he can definitely have that impact like we saw Emmanuel Quickly have for the Knicks, and maybe now he's with Toronto. Maybe he starts to have a bit more of an impact. He could follow a somewhat similar career path as well. It's going to be an interesting one to watch and see. And like if the shot is hitting early, that's definitely a huge plus.
Another question. We see this with a lot of teams. Like, who is the guy that they picked that shouldn't have let them get that player? He fell to that perfect team and he fit in perfectly. Do you see any guys like that in this draft? I got a name for you. What do you think?
Well, like guys we've already mentioned, like we were saying before, like I think Klingon is definitely the obvious one. If he was to fall to Memphis or even to fall to OKC, I think that would be very bad for teams in the Western Conference, I think.
So like a Brandon Pajimski type player. I'm thinking about Devin,
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
So we got Devin Carter, son of Anthony Carter, famously played for Miami Heat. Devin Carter, guy who very much embodies that level of Miami type play. Like plays way bigger than his size. And I love the shades of Jalen Brunson you get from him. Finishing off of 2 feet, but also the playmaking, that kind of bully ball, like bowling ball type of play he gets in the pick and roll, gets guys on his hip. Can not finish above the rim, but like I said, off 2 feet, great getting in the paint, great playmaking as well. And that shot, like he has proven that his 3-point shot is legit. It's a little older at 22, but when we're talking a draft like this, I feel like 22, 23, that's kind of my range. 24 is when it starts to get a little sketchy. But if you can get Devin Carter on the Miami Heat, and they need to, I think, re-up their perimeter. Losing Gabe Vincent was huge. We kind of saw that they're missing that level of punch. Losing Kyle Lowry, they need that replacement. They need a guy who's going to really lead from that 1-2 guard position and do a lot of the extra stuff, the effort, the defense, really laying out for the ball. Like that sort of level of play that you got from Gabe Vincent, I think you'd replace that pretty well.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if he fell that deep, but I know like the angle you're looking at here, if a guy was to fall that deep, I think, yeah, that would definitely, I think he's definitely worth a pick somewhere in like the 8 to 12 range. I think I'd be very surprised if he was to fall out of that range, because I think he's got that talent. I think we've seen enough from him. And even like he's like you said, he's like older guy, but not an old guy coming out of the draft. And that's always like that sweet spot that you try to find it. Like you can believe maybe a bit more that he's going to be able to have an impact straight away. But yeah, I think that's definitely a great pick. If he were to fall that low, if he were to fall all the way to Miami, wow, like that would be yeah, that would be a few teams missing out there. But that'd be he's like that exact type of guy that the Lakers would miss on if they were picking that high, you know.
I think end of the day, just kind of wrapping up the draft conversation here. Going into this, not super excited. You don't have your Anthony Edwards, your LaMelo Balls. You don't have your Chet Holmgrens, your Paolo Bancheros. But I think we've seen a really big influx of stars, young stars in this league, and there's definitely a need for, guys who know their role, who are stars in their role. And I think going through all these players that we've not just mentioned here today, but guys who didn't even make the list that are going to surprise us, as we are every single year, I think that this draft will not be remembered as maybe the worst draft of all time, but I think be remembered for a lot of the high level role players that they produce. And that's not always a bad thing. And I think we mentioned a lot of the teams picking in the top 10 have questions to be answered about their rosters that don't have to do with stars. I mean, Detroit, they have their talented guys. They have their core. Atlanta obviously has their core. Houston definitely has their core. San Antonio has their star. Memphis has their stars. Utah's got some guys too. And Portland, I mean, they too, that they're still believing in Scoot, as I think everyone should continue to do so. Be patient with Scoot. There's going to be a need for players that are not maybe superstar, multiple time all-star level talents, but are very good players. And maybe this is kind of the right time to slot into that. I think I'm a little more excited than I was last week, we'll say.
Yeah, like doing more research and obviously helps. You watch some video, you see some guys, and then you look in the lottery and you think of the teams like you just mentioned that aren't necessarily looking for that home run swing. They're just looking to fill out the roster around the guys that they already have, and that this draft is kind of perfect for that. So obviously it's a terrible draft if you're the Washington Wizards, kind of if you're the Atlanta Hawks too, because especially if they're planning on rebuild. And maybe even like the Hornets, they still looking for that other guy. It's hard to tell. It's tough situation now with the injuries that LaMelo has gone through. But I think your point stands. I think this won't be remembered as bad a class as it's being kind of tipped up to be ahead of the draft. I think that's definitely a point that needs to strike home with people. There's a lot of good role players in this team in this draft. And I think especially if we get the right fits, it could end up being remembered as a really strong class. Like we mentioned, guys sliding, guys going to certain places. I think that also helps when you look back on a class if these guys end up in the right situation. And there's more than a few lottery picks that their careers could vastly change whether they get put in the right situation or the wrong situation.
Yeah. Biggest question. Does Bronny James get drafted tomorrow?
I don't think he gets drafted tomorrow. I think he's gonna get drafted on Thursday. Thursday is when he will get taken in the second round, probably by the Lakers. But he's obviously had his couple of workouts with the Suns, so if the Suns are wanting to take him, I'd like to see him not on the same team as LeBron. I just think that
On a personal level, yeah, I agree.
like it doesn't make sense. He's talking about wanting to be his own guy, and like other people have said, like what if like JJ Redick is benching him and you have to deal with LeBron, like why are you benching my son? Like get him out there and play,
yeah.
and like I'll make him be good and all that, like that sort of crap. Yeah, it'd be fun and be social media buzz to father son playing together, but I think I'd like to see him somewhere that is not the Los Angeles Lakers. That's one thing I'll say about Bronny James.
And I think we've not seen any buzz about LeBron moving just to play with him. Like I said last year, I wonder if that would have been an interesting dynamic here if he was just going to come out and straight up just be like, I'll go wherever he goes, because that's been his dream, right? To play with his son. That would be an interesting dynamic, and haven't heard any rumblings about it. And if it was going on, maybe we would have heard it, but maybe that's some tip-top secret stuff.
They were quick to mute that conversation, especially after the Lakers season ended. I think Rich Paul made a point of ruling that out. I think Bronny, talking in like some of the social and different things he was doing, talked about how it's not always been his dream. He's like, yeah, it'd be cool, but it's not like something that's on his list. And I think Bron himself has kind of quieted down a little bit. That doesn't mean that it might not still happen. Maybe that's all in the master plan of LeBron James and Rich Paul, who we don't really know until we know. But yeah, on Bronny, cool that he's coming into the league. Hopefully he gets an honest chance of it and doesn't just constantly get compared to his father, which is always going to be tough and a heights that he's almost never ever going to reach. So hopefully that isn't all we get when it comes to Bronny James. But obviously a cool thing, definitely a reason to be excited for the second day where Bronny James ends up.
So tomorrow we at least get to see a lot of dreams come true. The day after, dreams come true. This is a week of dreams coming true for these young players who've been working for this for a long time. It's always such a good time, and I'm excited for it to be 2 nights. Honestly, not just because the NBA gets more money. I don't care about that. None of us care about that. But we get to maybe get a little more spotlight, learn a little bit more about these players and their stories, and excited to do it, man. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, that's always a cool side of thing. Maybe, and you're right. That's actually a good point. Hopefully, we get a bit more time, kind of learning about these guys, and that always makes you feel a bit more connected to these guys, even when they're not getting drafted to their team. But got to finish out our conversation for today. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening. NBA draft takes place Wednesday, Thursday this week, and then after that, we get into all the fun and hustle of free agency and trades and everything like that. It's the NBA season, it never stops, but we will be here to cover it all for you whenever and whatever goes down. But for today, that's going to do it. Remember, we are everywhere on social media at Coast to Coast NBA, and most importantly, remember to take every shot and love every moment.
Peace out.